Welcome to the session, and it gives me great pleasure again to welcome Dr. Natalie Jackson to Timaru. The last video that we did and the last time she was here with us was in February 2013, so 2 years, 2 months ago. It's April 2015 now. Since then, we've had a census in New Zealand, and so last time Natalie was talking to us, she was working on projections of the 2006 data, which was getting a little bit old, I think it was fair to say, and we'd had an earthquake in Canterbury and a few things like that. So today we're expecting Natalie to give us updated information on the new census, and I understand there's been more modelling done and some new tools and things like that, so we've got some additional information that's come through from that. So we're just looking forward to a really good afternoon, just exploring some of the trends and changes in demographics. Thank you, Natalie.
Thanks, Ross. So well, tēnā koutou everybody, and thanks for actually picking up on my offer to come down, because the other thing that's happened since I came down was that the Royal Society actually funded our grant application, and you know, it's very, very hard. There's about 30 get funded a year from about 1,300 applications. So when you get a Royal Society Marsden, you're very happy, and we are, because we think this is really important work. Now, I might say that having arrived in the South Island about a bit over a week ago in Nelson, then going down the west coast and across from Haas to Queenstown and Invercargill and so on, I've been dealing in a lot of the, except for Queenstown and Wanaka, dealing with a lot of the declining areas, and I know it's different here. But the story is important, because what you'll see from some of the new maps that I've got in here, you just understand how this overall demographic change is unfolding. So I've got maps that show you projected change at, say, 0 to 14 and then 15 to 24 and so on. And the overall picture that you will get, because I colour my maps blue for decline and red for growth, what you'll see is right across the country, decline, 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 and then when you get to 65, basically growth, growth, growth. And it has implications for you, because in a growing area you still need labour supply, and everybody else is going to be madly competing with you for it, right? So I've recently done the Venture Southlands workforce strategy, and they've been dealing with this now for quite a few years, struggling to find skilled labour, but it's also not just skilled labour now, it's starting to be just general labour shortages, and you're probably aware that you have really low unemployment in the South Island, and again that correlates with older populations. So what we find in regions where the population is older, there's much lower unemployment in the young population and in the older population, because you're starting to dig deeper into the population that you've got to supply your workforce needs. So I'll touch on that, but the overall picture is, yes, that, you know, I haven't come here to tell you the world is over for you. You are in a very fortunate spot, as you'll see when I show these maps. This area still glows red, or at least pink or yellow, all the warm colours, except for, you know, when we go on a little bit further, Waitaki, Waimati and Timaru sort of starts to, you know, growth slowing down because of population ageing. Okay, so now the overall issue is that, I've got it here somewhere, the world population growth is actually projected to end around the end of the present century. Now that's often a surprise for people, so I like to start with that so that you understand that this is an overall global trend, and that it's happening first, of course, in the developed countries. So by mid-century, there'll only really be the United States is about the only one really projected to be growing in any significant way among the developed world. Australia and New Zealand will still be growing, but very, very slowly. And you're probably aware that already countries like Japan and most of Europe have stopped growing and are declining. And this is because of structural population ageing. So what is happening is you get these age structures that are turning upside down. So we used to, when I was born in 1950, have a very pyramidal age structure, and now as the baby boomers have tracked through the age structure with me, the age structure is getting top heavy, and then their children have had fewer children, and so this declining birth rates is compressing the population at the base. So what you have is the whole age structure sort of going from this very youthful dynamic with an internal momentum of growth to one which contains an internal momentum of decline that is playing out and that will hit home to us from now on. It's already actually, Waitaki has had a period of natural decline, but at the moment back in natural growth and a little bit of net migration gain. But as I'll explain, it's really going to be difficult to stave off this ending of growth in a lot of areas because the internal momentum of decline that's built up in the age structure, once you get past 20% over the age of 65, that's 20% of your population, most of whom are not having children. You can see what's going on. So that's the overall picture, and it will be happening. It's already happening in the developing countries. Birth rate, global average birth rate's now around 2.3, 2.4. So even though there's some countries that still have on average 5 or 6 births, they're all coming down. The cause of the growth is getting control over infant and child mortality, and I explained that at some length, I think, at the previous one, so you could have a look at that, those slides if you were interested. And of course, as I'm implying, growth won't end evenly. The whole world growth coming to an end, about 15% probability that it could keep growing past the end of the century. Developed countries declining first, and within them, lots of areas declining. And that's what we're looking at in this project. And the title, The Ebbing of the Human Tide, what does it mean for the people, I think is really important, because everywhere I go, and Ross, Grant, we were all at, Grant, you were there, weren't you? Sorry, I'm just about to say that you were there a couple of weeks ago.
No, I wasn't.
No, you weren't. Well, okay, but Ross was at the National Infrastructure Management workshop, and both the local government one, which I spoke at, and the National Infrastructure Unit. And you guys deal with long-term things, long-term renewals of roads and pipes and things, and yet you're going to have to be doing this management of infrastructure in many cases where your population growth is coming to an end, and you're not just going to be able to, as easily as in the past, transfer debt to the next generation, because that next generation is going to be so much smaller and so on. So there's big issues even where you're growing. But even at conferences like that, even though it got talked about at the different tables that I sort of sat around and talking with different people, there's still quite a resistance to the whole idea, because people are still addicted to growth, and the idea that will actually come to an end is still quite a challenge for a lot of people. So lots and lots of challenges ahead. And I should say right now, the two things. One is I don't have the answers. My job has very much been bringing awareness of this issue to people. But increasingly I'm sort of working in the area of workforce planning to try and help with that, because the workforce is the first part that shrinks. The second is that the data are never exact. Where I show 5,332 or whatever, it's never that exact, but it's approximate. So you have to think of these data as approximations, and they are relative, so that modelling is all done in the same way for each region. So therefore, if you're growing compared to decline and so on, you can understand that it might not be absolutely accurate, but it's a pretty good approximation. So what I do, I like to break up population ageing into 4 dimensions. That helps people to understand really what's going on. Ross could probably recite this now because he's seen it so many times. Numerical ageing, the absolute increase in the number of older people, primary cause increased life expectancy. Structural ageing, as I was explaining, the increased numbers become an increased proportion because of the declining fertility rates. Very different issues, and each of you might be dealing with different parts of that ageing process. And then the natural decline, once a population has more elderly than children, it's a short step to having more deaths than births, usually about 10 years. And we lose natural increase, and natural increase has really, in most cases, been our primary cause of growth. And we haven't really taken a lot of account of that, because whenever we talk population, we're thinking migration and migrants. But natural increase has been the primary cause of our growth, even in Auckland, and as we lose natural increase, with the ageing of the population, we become more and more vulnerable to the ending of growth because it becomes increasingly dependent on migration. And then, lastly, areas that succumb to net migration loss will, have a real trouble with the combined impact. And this is why it's happening. Here I've put in Waimati's age structure. I usually use Thames Coromandel, which has nearly 27% over the age of 65, just to show you what happens, because Thames Coromandel has natural decline now, once you get the more elderly than children and so on. But you can see your age structure for Waimati, and in the background here is what the age structure looked like in 1996, and the shaded bars are 2013. So you can see how rapidly it's ageing, but I'll show you other age structures shortly, and you'll see it's similar for everywhere. Everywhere the population is ageing, pretty much except, well, everywhere is ageing, but Auckland is ageing very, very slowly, in Hamilton City. And what's going on is we're going from the old form of decline, which was primarily the net loss of young adults, who are also the ones who have the kids, and then the compounding of that over time has removed the reproductive base, so then the more elderly than children gives you this double impact of why growth is slowing.
So with Waimati, are they considered to be in natural decline now? Or?
No, well, what happens with natural decline, it tends to take about 10 years from the first time it appears, and then you might get a little burst. You only need 4 or 5 births more than deaths to be not in natural decline, so you're going to hover along probably for about a decade, but it becomes increasingly difficult to stave it off. Right. So the other thing is that even across the whole of New Zealand, population growth is projected to continue, but 2/3 of the growth out over the next 2 decades is at 65 plus. And as I'll show you in a moment, in more than 2/3 of the TAs, all of the growth is at 65 plus, and most other age groups decline. So that's you've got growth, but it's fundamentally different growth to the growth that we had when populations were young, and you see it here. I've got medium projections and high projections, just to show you that there's very little difference going out 10 years for total New Zealand. So again, you understand it's not just any of local areas that might be vulnerable, but it's national. It's sort of around about 11 to 12% growth, and very little difference whether you're dealing with the medium case projections, which add in 12,000 international migrants a year, or the high projections, which add in 36,000 migrants a year. It doesn't really change the ratio of young to old, because the high projections keep more older people alive, as well as increasing the numbers of births a bit. But there's a little bit of a difference, but it's not huge.
The, sort of the positive change in the sort of 25 to 30 to 40 bracket, but then negative in the
yes.
40
Okay.
to 55 bracket. Can you explain that?
Yes, and you'll see it in a minute on the maps, and that's a good question. So it's in part the ageing of the cohorts. So say cohorts that are currently 35 to 39 becoming 40 to 44. It's not net loss going overseas or anything in these data here. Whereas what you've got is, this is where the major impact of the net international migration comes in here. And again, there's a bit of cohort changes. So the best way to think about it is, and I'll come to this in a minute again, there's between 2002 and 2008, there was a baby blip born. They're currently at upper primary school. They will go to high school, then they'll go into the workforce. And so, but it's a wave, and there's a trough behind it, and it will have various impacts. At the same time, we're currently seeing, we're in this 10-year period that we're halfway through, got 28,000 fewer school leavers in New Zealand because of the declining birth rates in the 1990s. So you always got to be sort of thinking, where have they come from, what age are they, and where will they be in 10 years' time. So largely that's cohort impacts, but added to with migration there.
So the 25 to 39 is almost primarily entirely migration, is it?
The growth is, yes, that's right. Because smaller 15 to 19-year-olds will become smaller 20 to 24-year-olds and then smaller 25 to 29-year-olds. And I'll show you that in a minute. Whoops, sorry, I keep hitting the wrong side. So these young people, precious commodity, and I keep saying to people that if you want a labour force in the future, you need to get in there to those upper primary school kids now, high school kids, and be bringing them, telling them, you know, train up to be an engineer. As I was saying before, I keep telling my own grandsons, you know, you need engineers, you need transport drivers, we need, you know, nursing care and so on. But there's some areas that you probably don't need to train for. A couple of slides just to introduce you to those concepts. So the increased numbers, there's 46,870 baby boomers turning 65 this year alone, and it will go up to 50,000 next year, and 53, 55, and then over 60,000 every year for 10 years. That's as the big baby boomer cohorts move through. So I'm not talking about the impact on the superannuation today, but you can imagine what it's going to look like. That's huge gain each year. Here's these age structures again, showing you how now we've got the 2013 data. Really, I mean, these slides don't look a lot different to the ones that we had with the 2006 data, or where we used the projection for 2013, but they are all updated. And so there's Timaru with 15% over the age of 65. Just put that one in there compared to Auckland to show you that even it's ageing a little bit. Some of the movement here, some of the gain up here, if you look at the 1996 in the background and then 2013, some of these people have moved up into there over that 17-year period if they've remained in the area. And in other cases, I think you've probably got inward movements here of people in the older age groups retiring, early older age groups. There's Waitaki and Ashburton. So Ashburton with 16% over the age of 65, gone up from 15.6%. That's not a very great increase, and obviously there's a lot of growth in that area. And I did projections for Timaru, Waimati and Mackenzie, and I know that each of them either gained quite a few people from Christchurch, which will be colouring in these data, or in some cases I think there was an indirect effect where net migration loss to Christchurch, which had been quite significant. So for Timaru, I think you lost in the previous intercensal period, lost something like a net 792 Christchurch, and in the 2006-2013 period gained about 85 or something, a net gain. So it doesn't sound a lot, but it was way different to the previous losses, and you very much see it in the 15 to 24-year-old age groups, where the net loss has reduced. So a sort of an indirect effect, I think, of the earthquakes. But that's just to really illustrate how different the age structures are. And so for Waitaki with 22% over the age of 65, that is getting into serious potential permanent natural decline situation.
So the threshold for that is it 25% or is it?
It's once you get over 20%, because it just depends. Sometimes it's what's happening at the bottom of the age structure as well. That means whether you've got the sufficient number of mums and dads, but 25% you really are in the land of natural decline.
Right.
Pretty significantly. Waimati, Mackenzie. Okay, so that just gives you the idea that they all differ. And when you start to get down here, one of the indicators that I look at is the proportion of the population that's in the key reproductive age groups. So we say 25 to 39 years, because that's where the bulk of children are being born. And once you get very low proportions there, then they just don't deliver enough babies to offset the growth at the older ages.
I think, Natalie,
yes.
you have to go back.
Yes.
Yeah, because all the TAs around here have got that same issue. We get the young people going off to tertiary education.
Yep,
and
that's
it
right.
pulls so that's Timaru, Oamaru, Waimate. It's the same effect, I think, for all of them.
It is.
That's what that's trimming in is there.
That's right, and that's really characteristic of most areas except Dunedin. Invercargill gets a few at those ages, but Hamilton gains, Wellington gains, the university and Polytech areas gain young people at those ages. Everywhere else loses them, but the important thing is about getting them back and letting them know how precious they are. And I think one of the things that people aren't looking at much in New Zealand is the whole repatriation thing. Is you've gone overseas, is it time to come home and have your kids in a nice safe place and so on. These two maps here show you change by census area unit, 2006 to 13 and 2001 2006. And I put them there just to really illustrate how decline is actually really beginning in the North Island. I mean, the central North Island has really sort of hollowed out a lot, and you see a lot more blue than you see in the previous period. And if we look at the number of, there's about 1,800 census area units that we consider populated. 32% in the North Island declined in that period compared to 25% in the previous period. And in the South Island it was 36% compared to 27%. So you can see that depopulation is something that is happening. And it's been happening for a while, but this is nearly all depopulation caused by urbanisation, people moving to the urban areas, and net migration, loss of young people. It's mainly not yet. It's only in 3 cases caused by natural decline.
So blues
decline.
Cold colours decline. And
cold colours decline, dark blue, lots of decline. Warm colours, growth. And of course, now around Christchurch and around these areas here, obviously there was a massive outflow, about 22,000 net in the 2000 and immediately after the earthquakes really, and the numbers are growing again in Christchurch, but they haven't yet got back to the numbers they were previously, and so it does colour some of these red areas perhaps in this area, and it just depends whether they stay in those areas or whether they move back into Christchurch. The jury seems to be out on it when I look at what happens after disasters in various cities around the world or wherever they happen. Children, especially if they go, move to a new area and go to new schools, they tend to make friends and they become quite a force to reckon with in terms of moving back. But I think this information down here is what's important. So not only did Auckland account for more than half the growth over this whole period, but Auckland plus 5 TAs accounted for 75% of New Zealand's growth. I think that's pretty staggering. And then Auckland plus 12 TAs accounted for 90% of the growth. So you can see what we're saying is that growth is actually getting spread very, very thinly everywhere else.
So what's happening in Queenstown and Waugh? It's so exciting to live there.
One would wonder.
Yeah.
I don't want to be disparaging.
Very red.
Very red and massive growth. And I was driving through there the other day and I see this place called Albert Town, as some of you know. It seems to be springing up out of the paddock, but clearly a lot of growth. The other side of it is that it's so heavily dependent on one major industry that it becomes vulnerable as well. So, these projections that we have, or this is actually what's happened, not projections, but when you see projected growth, you also got to think about, there's always going to be some vulnerabilities over time.
I think you're seeing people retire into that area too, though. I can think of probably half a dozen people I know of that are either are retiring or have bought property down there to retire down there.
But there's a lot of family age people gone, and with school kids as well, and I see there's a school going up as well. So
the new school in Arrowtown,
and I hope that that's been demographically informed, because this little baby blip that suddenly the schools were saying, we've got all these 5-year-olds, where do they all come from? And then they start building schools, and then by the time they get the schools built, the kids have stopped coming because that was just a short-term blip. So that picture that we've just seen is projected to continue, so Auckland continuing to take a bigger share. Your region gets the second biggest share, but over time that share is still projected to diminish because Auckland's expected to keep taking more. However, you're in a very healthy position, and there's no doubt about it, as you drive into the region, you get the feel that, you know, there's plenty happening here.
Natalie,
Waikato.
we've got the complexity with Waikiki being split across 2 regions as well, haven't we? So that's obviously a difficult one in terms of identifying the trends.
Exactly, and look, TA boundaries are, you know, you drive over them and you don't know, right? So it's important that you're just working with those neighbouring ones that have common boundaries. However, when it comes to rates, which is critically important, those boundaries work very tightly. And so maybe talk about rate sharing. If you happen to be parked next to a youthful TA, you should maybe talk to it and be nice to it.
The thing that surprises me with that slide, Natalie, is,
Yeah.
is Waikato.
Yes.
I would have actually thought it was growing more than that, given the dynamics that it's got there.
Well, there's some very ageing areas. So Waikato has the oldest and the youngest. Thames Coromandel is the oldest TA in the country, or it vies with Kapiti Coast and just a couple. Hauraki is very old. Matamata Piako is ageing fast. So Waipa is quite old. It's growing mainly in Hamilton City, but in North Waikato, with the boundary to Auckland. And so spillover from Auckland.
Because you drive past Pocono at the moment.
I know.
It's just houses can build everywhere there.
Well, you can't drive past it, can you? Because
No.
those cars coming out on the road, they, you know, it used to take me half an hour to get from Pocono, from the Bombay Hills essentially, into Auckland. It's now over an hour. And that's because they haven't got the infrastructure to accommodate where they encourage people to live. Yeah, so it may happen. Some of it's a little bit, the base had a little bit of boundary change which pushed the base up and so on. But the general picture is that people will still want to live in Auckland. Now, these projections don't take account of things like changing tastes and changing value systems. And, you know, baby boomers, for example, may want to leave Auckland, may not want to stay in Auckland as they age. Projections are done, they take the age sex structure, you apply fertility rates to women 15 to 49, you apply historical migration trends by age and life expectancy assumptions. And so they're a bit crude, however they've been remarkably accurate in the case of Auckland in terms of taking the bulk of the share, and that's been quite consistent for some time. Righto, so just want to reflect briefly on the fact that before I move on to looking at what's going on with these maps and so on, that migration isn't going to get us out of this ageing situation. Everywhere else is ageing. So, you know, we're only competing in a sort of a limited pool for the people that we want and so on. And the birth rate is going to stay low. It may hover around a little bit, but it's not going to go back to 4 or 5 births per woman. So here we have migration across the 58 more developed countries out to 2031. Overall population growth is projected to be less than 5%, and that's actually probably a bit high now. At 65 plus years, there's going to be about another 98 million people that age, adding to the current 200 million in these countries. At all other age groups combined, 0 to 64, the projection is for decline of 41 million. And it's that cell over there that we compete for our major skilled migrants, and where we compete with the people, you know, like Australia, and where our own young people are also being sucked across the Tasman and so on. Auckland, on the other hand, grow by about a third, doubling at 65 plus years. All other age groups combined projected to grow by about 23%, and since they're such a bulk of the population, you know, the ratio will stay fine. But for the rest of New Zealand, around 11% growth, as I showed before, 88% growth at 65 plus, and all other age groups combined declining fractionally, or at least, you know, you could just say not growing, because of the low birth rates and because of past changes in low birth rates, and then bit by bit the smaller cohorts become the parental age groups, and so, you know, everything starts to compound, and that's what population ageing is. This is this fertility rate, long-term picture of the total fertility rate. We peaked at 4.2 births per woman in 1961. Half of New Zealand's births in that year were to women under the age of 24. Highly unlikely that we will go back to that. But what we've seen is these echoes that first of the baby boomers born here started having their children there, and then the early child bearers from there started having their children, and then we've had this recent little baby blip, which I've called Thank God You're Here, generation Thank God You're Here, because they arrive in the labour market around mid-2020s, exactly as the biggest baby boomer cohorts start to reach retirement age. So they're Thank God You're Here because of their impact on the labour force.
But that blip only took us up to 2.1.
Yes, that's right, and it's now down to 1.92. It's the latest, and it's the lowest that we've ever been.
Everybody knows 2.1's replacement rate.
Yes.
So if you're below 2.1, your population's declining if you've got no migration.
Yes. So 2.1, you need 2.1 births per woman to replace each generation. And you can see that it's been down under that or around that for half a century. So we're really, the total fertility rate has also got problems with measurement and so on, but when it's been that low for a long time, you are seriously unlikely to go back.
Would it be subject to how long people live as well, though?
The fertility rate?
Yeah.
It is, in that with all the babies, with all children living now, or pretty well all children living, people sort of see they don't need to have 8 or 10 or 12.
If I may ask, how does world events actually impact that? Because if I look at the dates where there was quite a big growth or birth rate, it was after World War I.
That's right.
World War II.
That's right.
Yeah.
So again, we could say if we had another horrible event like a war or a massive plague or something, it could alter the birth rate. But the confluence of the social world at that time, which said that women can be flicked out of the workforce again that they'd gone into and so on, it's just highly unlikely with so many young women having higher education now and delaying average age at having a child in New Zealand is now over 30. So all of these things work together to keep it low.
Did the Americans see a blip after 9/11?
I don't know, but it's a good question. I will look.
They had a blip after the power cuts earlier.
You do see a few of those little blips, but
Yeah,
getting it up to.
The whole eastern seaboard had a big power cut. It's
Showed up in the birth
showed up.
statistics.
It's really difficult to think of getting the birth rate up to a level that you would actually bring about replacement again, and it's such a long-term thing. So even if you got the birth rate up today, it's 20 odd years before they reach the labour market and so on.
We're still quite high by Western standards, though, because my understanding
Yes.
is the likes of Italy and France and Germany are like in the 1.4, 1.5 range.
Italy's been 1.1 for
Right.
several years, so it means that the child generation is half the size of the parent generation. You can see how quickly a population can tip upside down, or the grandchild generation is a quarter the size of the grandparent generation.
given the issues in places like Greece and other countries in the EU with their economy, I can't imagine it will be encouraging
More
rates
births.
to be terribly high either.
No, and also correlates with like employment and unemployment and so on. And again, when you get to somewhere like Greece, you're talking about already about 24% of the population over the age of 65. So a quarter of your people are sort of well beyond having children, for most of them anyway. So what I'm going to show you now is these maps, and these overall trends are underpinned by what we call age structural transitions. So that's this changing cohort size that I've been talking about. And that will affect every aspect of infrastructure provision, not least funding into the future, but also different types of demand. And, I would not want to be making decisions about, how on earth you're going to fund renewal of infrastructure and so on in the future. But one of the things that I often concern myself about is the way you're so dependent on rates, rate revenue. That is something that is going to be a problem in the future, and especially like, we said before about the boundaries just being contiguous boundaries, but you can have an old population here and a young population here, but you're all sharing the same facilities. So, Australia's Fiscal Horizontal Equalisation Act is a sort of thing that, you know, shares funds around for places that have to provide services in the daytime for day tripper populations and so on. And, you know, I think New Zealand's going to have to look at something like that. Okay, so also just draw your attention to the fact that I'm on another 5-year project that's just been funded by MB, Ministry of Business and Innovation, and that's to look at the demographic diversity of New Zealand and capturing the demographic diversity. So that's a Massey and Waikato project. And so we're looking at now how critically important changing ethnic composition is going to be to your populations, and the need to have you know, inclusiveness and ensure settlement issues and so on, because the migrants that you're getting now become a critical anchor or magnet, if you like, for bringing people in this world in which you're going to be competing for migrants so much in the future. If you've got a small contingent of African people or whatever population that you didn't used to get your migrants from, Russian, is it? Croatian?
Around here, we've got probably a couple of hundred Filipinos out on
Yes.
the dairy farms and that really 10 years ago we didn't have.
That's right.
Is it the same down your way? Yeah. So and I noticed, I saw something in the paper. There was a Nepalese in Waimate doing the same sort of stuff. So
That's
we're
right.
starting to get broader Asian migrants into this
Where
area
you
that
didn't
never
hardly
had them,
ever
yeah.
have them.
It's interesting.
That's
in
right.
Southland, some of the libraries there, the council's running, are having to bring in Spanish books
Yes.
in the Spanish language for that group.
Mm-hmm.
They're just showing how
Yes.
developing it is.
Well, there are more young Asians in the Southland region than there are young Māori now. Young, by young, I mean they're working entry ages. So that's changing a lot. I've heard some wonderful stories about churches that had got down to 4 or 5 parishioners and have suddenly got rows of Filipinos turning up on Sunday. So they love it, you know. But it's very important because these people, and they're not just working in farming, but of course they're in the aged care industry and providing nursing services and so on. These are your future population, and that's what we're looking at. European population, when we project it forward, the share that the European population has held is just falling massively, and yet as recently as 1986, only 7% of New Zealand's population was not either European or Māori. So that's how fast it's changing.
I think one thing with Kent in particular is there's a lot of English. people,
Yes,
like certainly-
Scottish.
Like well, English in particular, like at the
Yes.
school my children are at, English immigrants would be the second largest group after New Zealand
Right.
Caucasian.
Right. Well, that will change because, you know, these people are now being just competed for everywhere. So it's about trying to work out where the sending countries are, and then, you know, there are other issues coming up, like is it right for countries like New Zealand and Australia to cherry pick the brightest and the most educated from some of these countries? Is that fair? And so on, you know, and those issues are being raised. They were raised at the World Population Conference that I was at a few years ago.
So what was the consensus on that?
No, it's not fair. And the developing countries, like in some cases, remittances are very important. So people are supported to come to countries like New Zealand and Australia, and they send home a lot of money. But the entire contingent of Malawi nurses was snaffled by London a few years ago. You know, that sort of thing. It leaves a country that has worked really hard to train those people. So, you know, there were arguments that we might have to play a bigger role in actually paying for that education in the future if we're going to import it for our needs. So some big changes out there. I mean, the message is there that intergenerational transfer of debt is going to become more and more difficult, and there will be some hard calls have to be potentially made about where you do expand in areas where you can see the cap is coming. Certainly I know that Wellington has looked at this information and said, okay, we're not going to keep growing forever, so therefore, you know, we are going to make some decisions about going up rather than going further out and things like that. And we were having some discussions there at lunchtime, the idea that you may start to identify areas where you will provide certain types of services. I mean, it's such a huge issue, Ross, and you know that gentleman that came and spoke about the disruption that's going to be caused by the electric car. it's something that profound that
And this is another disruption.
this is a disruption. It's a disruption because you know, we've just never had populations in which we've had more older people than children. All of our population growth being at older ages. What does it mean for the type of infrastructure you're going to build? You know, older people driving around on those mobile toys, which they are highly dangerous on in many cases, coming round corners at you, probably need, you know, over street pathways and things like that. And I did the post-earthquake demography for Sarah, and I was saying that there, that, you know, what an opportunity to build a city of the future for the type of housing that you might build, where you could actually build, you know, a way of getting to places that doesn't require you to sit at a curbside and worry about getting across the street and so on. So those are the sort of issues as opposed to the rates. But my concern about the whole issue is that central government doesn't seem to be taking it terribly seriously yet. So it's very Auckland focused on how to help Auckland deliver or respond to its growth rather than help the regions deal with its decline.
Quite a young demographic and
Very
a lot of
young,
growth going on.
very young, and
Yeah.
it will indefinitely, at least throughout this century. But you know, you have to dialogue with government on every possible opportunity and ask them what they're going to do about the ageing-driven end of growth. You know, so yes, for right here, Timaru, Oamaru, you know, these places are still going to grow for quite a while because people are still coming in from the regions and so on into them. But the ageing will overwhelm that in-migration before much longer. So the ageing and the natural decline the in-migration won't offset the natural decline.
So is some of the thinking behind the super cities based around this?
The
You
demography?
mentioned the sharing of services and that sort of thing. Is that some of the thinking behind those things or not?
Look, that they use demography is central in looking at everything they do in Auckland. Up until now, I haven't really done a lot on it, but I'm actually writing a chapter on Auckland at the moment for my sons, and I'm learning fast. But they have a very strong regional modelling group there. It's called REMU, and they do use demography because just Auckland isn't homogeneous either. You know, there's much older areas and much younger areas. So now here's the set of maps, and this is the latest data from Stats New Zealand. This one shows you the 0 to 14 change in the size of the 0 to 14 year population right across by TA. So generation TGYH that I mentioned before, currently around about 8 to 14 years of age. As they move out of this demographic, you're just going to see massive decline, but we're already seeing it because a lot of the areas didn't really get many extra babies. So blue is decline, dark blue is lots of decline, red is growth. Clearly you've got some growth just north of you there, modest growth in your area here, that growth over in Wanaka and Queenstown Lakes that we were talking about before. But pretty much everywhere else it's blue, and that you see how it progresses over time. It's sort of, the projection is that there's not going to be massive growth at 0 to 14 years, and where it is, it will be patchy. And then it's about whether they stay in your areas. So
Selwyn's the place to be in the South Island, isn't it? That's Selwyn we're looking at with the red.
that's right.
Yeah.
But, you know, the extent to which the underlying population base, I mean, I haven't actually been there yet, we're going there tomorrow, but the extent to which the underlying population base is inflated through the movement of people out there and then the projection onto that, because, you know, basically you're building in an artificial situation and continuing it out over time. So whether it will stay bright red or whether it will just be pink, we don't know. But that's 0 to 14. And really all I want you to do, so 2013, 23, 23, 33, 33, 43. Essentially, the numbers of 0 to 14-year-olds are not projected to decline greatly, just to remain about the same, but declining a bit in each area.
Natalie, the thing that surprises me with those maps is the central North Island
Yes.
and lower North Island. I mean, instinctively living down here, you'd think they're growing more than the South Island. I mean, the South Island just tapers off quite slowly. They change quite quickly, don't they? So
Well, like Taupo, for example, has a relatively old population, and then south of Taupo, all that whole Waiouru area has lost a heck of a lot of armed forces. South Waikato,
Yeah.
you know,
But you've all got the whole of Hawke's Bay, Manawatu,
that's right.
Wairarappa's
Yes,
all in that.
even with large Māori populations. Yep,
Yeah.
that's right. But they're, you know,
And then
fairly
Lower Bay of
conservative.
Plenty as well.
Mhm.
You know, that's the thing that surprised me, I guess, as you get out there, is like all Whakatane
I'm
and
surprised.
all of that area,
Mm.
because they're quite
But look at
vibrant.
the dark blue in these areas here.
Yeah.
But you know, notice like even around Wellington, the cities tend, except for Auckland, not having a great increase in 0 to 14-year-olds, because cities, as soon as people go to the cities, they have lower birth rates. So the rural divide that there used to be, where regional rural people had slightly higher birth rates, then as they move into the cities, that is pulling it all down. But that's 0 to 14, and the best way of showing it is just to go through these maps fairly quickly, and you can look at them at your leisure. But think about that the blue here, that's between 10 and 15% decline, which is the main colour, and the darkest blue is more than 15% decline in that age group. So it's declined, and then the new base declines from that, and then it declines from that again. Okay, so it's not just compounded over time, it's progressive decline. So then we have 15 to 24-year-olds, and as I mentioned before, we're currently in this space where we've got 28,000 fewer 15 to 19-year-olds, school leavers coming through, and then they move into the 20 to 24-year age groups. In 2023, 2033, we'll have a short respite because the generation TGYH will arrive, and it will bring some of the TAs out of having fewer people at 15 to 19. Again, a lot of the areas down here are the anomalies. I don't know the answers yet, but I'm
That
keen to find out.
That's a bit surprising. You guys in the middle there, going back up again, isn't it? So
Yep.
I can't understand why North Taranaki is got spread up there. 12 people
Farming could be because we met all 12
No,
people up there.
Gas, oil and gas as well, and
Yeah.
dairy farming. So
North Taranaki is not much dairy up there.
that's New Plymouth district, that boundary, isn't it? I look at it.
I'm really surprised at that.
It's north.
So it gets so many people leaving.
It's New Plymouth and Stratford.
Mm.
And,
No.
South Taranaki.
It's Stratford's
The one
down
that
there.
turns red.
Stratford's down there. I'm talking
Yeah,
about this
but-
bit in here.
Yeah,
Yeah, that'll be-
but that's New Plymouth
You,
as well.
isn't that
in that.
out Uranui and all those sort of areas? So it is surprising.
Yeah.
I agree, but I can actually say that when we run these maps, and whenever I make a graph and I look at it myself and go, can't be true, we go back and check them. That's what the projections are showing.
So you guys got a baby boom going on in Waitaki at the moment? Is that what we're seeing? So
It must be that there's been a projection of diminishing loss of young people, I would say, and therefore from that people staying. Population 15 to 64 overall over the next short period, like out to 2023, it's going to be 8% larger nationally, but you can see decline throughout most of the country. Again, this area just north of here and some of the areas here are the anomalous ones. That's 15 to 64 years. So by 2018, 43% of the TAs are projected to have a smaller working age population than at the moment. And by 2023, 61% having a smaller working age population. So this is the shrinkage of the working age population, well recognised by Treasury, but just not talked about in terms of regional issues.
So if those areas are areas that are currently having higher levels of unemployment, that's not so bad. But if you've got the double whammy of having an area with a high level of unemployment and a higher growth in this area, that is obviously going to pose a problem.
Well, the projection is, and I'll come to the labour market implications in a moment, but at the moment there are only 9 people aged 15 to 29 in the employed labour force for every 10 in the 55 plus age groups in the employed population. There's only 8 people at labour market entry age across the country for every 10 in the retirement zone. And when I look at some of the industries, I'll come to those in a minute, but you're talking about 3 and 4 entrants for every 10 exits. So you have to break it up by which industries are going to grow. Healthcare and maybe education might level off a bit for a while, but certainly there'll be increase in healthcare. And again, linking it back to the global picture, a couple billion more people on the planet before we peak and so on. Huge issues about feeding the world's population. So agriculture and, horticulture and all that, you'll have growth in those jobs. See the picture, blues, lots of blues, very little red. Now this is why, we've got one too fast. Just go back one. 40 to 54 years, right, the baby boomers, youngest baby boomers are 50. So they are now just moving out of the 40 to 54 year age group, and so you're going to see massive decline coming in behind. It's what I was talking about before, the cohort effect. So if you're looking at 40 to 54 year olds, who are probably in most regions quite important people because they own the businesses and they, they employ people and so on. Diminishing number of them simply because they're actually moving on to older age groups, not because they're actually leaving. Talking with Waugh yesterday and saying you can actually track the youngest baby boomer cohort that in 1996 was say 35 and is now 52, you can track them through, and for Waugh, for all of the age groups, it's actually remained the biggest one, about 1,000 and 1,100 and 1,200 something. It stands out as it's aged over time compared to the smaller numbers in every other age group. And we were saying, well, it seems really important that you get out and talk to these people in these cohorts and say, what are your long-term intentions? Are you thinking of going to Wanaka or Queenstown? Can we attract you to stay here, and what do you want, and that sort of thing. But you can see how it will decline because simply pure demographics. Then we move up to the 55 to 64 year old population. That's currently growing because the 40 to 54 year olds are moving into it, and then it will decline as they move on and out. And then the 65 to 74 year age group, bright red everywhere. I just joined it a few weeks ago at 65. Thank you. So, myself and 48,000 other baby boomers turning 65 this year, you can see what I mean about them flooding into that age group. And then they will move on and out to the older age groups, and then the 75 plus age groups grow. Now, you can use that sort of information to work out, obviously demand for potential retirement villages or whatever. Certainly wouldn't be building them necessarily the same as they'd been built in the past because you've got a different type of cohort coming into them and so on. But these data are really important because, for example, Southland, where I've just been helping them with the workforce plan, part of the idea is to try and increase the participation rates at 55 plus years because you've got declining cohorts everywhere else. So you don't have to get the participation rate up very much when you've actually got a bigger cohort coming in. And it's worth thinking about that. If you try to increase the participation rate of, say, your 15 to 24 year olds, you actually might not get more people because you've got a declining demographic. Okay, so you're working those things out as you apply them to different issues. And there we go. And so this is the important one at this end of it. You see how it's gone from all blue basically to all red, and this demographic is not likely to decline. So you do have to start planning for that older population that you're going to have, and it's not just going to, as the baby boomers move through it, growth rates of that age group will slow, but it's nowhere going to decline. And then the last one is the overall picture that says, this is what we call our, overall picture of the ebbing of the human tide, right? Horrible colours to look at, but it's the only way we can ensure they show up in a room, which is often very bright. So red means 100% or more contribution to overall, so it's overall population increase, but the 65 plus population contributes more, 100% or more. It offsets decline at other ages. That's red. Purple means overall population decline, but there is massive growth at 65 plus. It's insufficient to offset the underlying decline. And the blue, which Waugh was not really very happy to see, and understandably the only one in the South Island, but that's where you're also anticipating decline at 65 plus, as well as overall decline.
So they're
But
not
these are
the only ones
projections.
in the South Island.
But you know, we're still talking about 20 years out, and projections get, you know, fuzzier as you go on out. So, as I said
Canterbury's
before,
a real anomaly, New Zealand-wise, isn't
yes,
it?
it is.
Yeah.
It is. And, you know, it looks like, I mean, the growth centres are really going to be just Auckland, Waikato, Tauranga Bay, parts of the Bay of Plenty, not all the Bay of Plenty by any means, and then Canterbury. And big growth of older population up there in the Nelson, Marlborough area as well. But that's the overall picture. So we've only recently produced this set of maps, and I haven't even written it up properly yet. I was just, you know, when I looked at it, I thought, well, there's the picture. The purple is means even massive growth at 65 plus can't offset underlying decline at other ages, and that's pretty widespread. And the red means, yep, you're growing, but all of the growth is at 65 plus, offsetting decline at other ages.
And so at 33 to 43, Timaru District drops into that category as well. Yeah.
And what we're trying to do out of this research is to try and typologise the regions, and I've got a little bit of that here as I get to it in a minute, just to say, well, you know, you can pretty much anticipate that you're in a particular danger zone, if you like, when you get, once you cross, I've created 8 indicators of advanced population ageing, and once you've crossed about 3 or 4 of them, we don't see anybody coming back out of it. You know, there'll always be the odd place like Pocono or somewhere. Some areas will reinvent themselves and will grow, but by and large, you're going to take population from somewhere else. So, you know, you should be very happy people that you live in this area, because other people are dealing with these realities. So 17 TAs won't have all of their growth at 65 plus, and you've got several of them in your overall area. And you know, as time goes on, I mean, it's hard to work out, like maybe there'll be amalgamations, who knows, you know, maybe TA boundaries won't be the same as they are, or what, but it's pretty clear that this region will be younger for longer, even though you, like everywhere else, you'll have older pockets. So up there it's just saying Kapiti Coast, Whangarei and Carlton up 95% of all growth at 65 plus, whereas down here a third and 45% more or less.
The thing that's really interested me with the maps that Natalie's shown here is that 2 years ago, when she had the maps particularly for Waitaki based on the 2006 census, it was worse.
That's right.
Waitaki had a lot more older already, and it was not predicted to change, and yet these ones are showing Waitaki staying in I guess the moderately old zone for
That's
a lot longer,
right.
and that's got to be the dairy growth, surely to goodness.
The dairy and a bit of impact from Christchurch, I think, from some people moving in some areas, but it seems like, and I'll show you the age profiles in a moment, but there's definitely in most areas been a reduction in the net loss of young people, and one wonders if it's sort of got to a point where young people are starting now to get the jobs in their areas and therefore not leaving the same, and that's quite systematic. So, you know,
that's right across New Zealand, is it?
not everywhere, but a lot of the areas, large lot of the areas that I've looked at.
SITs and this sort of thing.
That's right.
Education.
Huge. You see it, definitely see it for Invercargill. So look, just a couple of slides quickly on this demographically tight labour market. When the baby boomers entered the labour market up here and around the sort of back in the 1960s through to the 1980s, we were looking at around 15 people, 15 to 29, the entry ages, for every 10 in the retirement zone. And now as they move out, we're already down to 8 at 15 to 29 for every 10 55 plus. And then as they leave, it's going to drop down to 5. So this is going to mean that even though your region is growing, you know, everywhere else that unemployment rates are dropping and they are mopping up any available labour. So it will impact everywhere, I think.
Sorry, Natalie, can you just pop back to the previous slide? So where the red line crosses over the 1-to-1 ratio, from that point forward,
Yes,
there are more people leaving than entering.
there are more people in the leaving ages.
Yes.
So that's an important thing, because we all know that people over the age of 65 are keeping working, but at the moment they account for
You're not looking very
6%.
retired right now.
No, absolutely, and nor does anybody I know. But people over the age of 65 only account for 6% of the current employed workforce. So there's very definitely, you can see it in the next slide here, that this is 2013 employed labour force, and here's the 65 plus population is about 6%. So it's about double what it used to be, and it could become. There's 1 million baby boomers. If they all stay in for a bit longer, they already account for about 40% of, so they go right back down to here, account for about 40% of the workforce. If they stay in for longer, that means that the older proportion of the workforce is likely to increase, but it's not going to get us out of the trouble that we're in, because this is the problem down here. So there we went from in 1996, as recently as 1996, we had 27 young people for every 10 in the retirement zone, 55 plus, and now it's 9 for every 10. Now that's at the population level. So, it's pretty tight, I would say. Sorry, there's I don't know what's happened there, but this is showing you that if you were 35 here, you're 52 here, and that's just showing you I don't know why that's gone like that. And 2/3 of New Zealand's TAs already have fewer people at labour market entry than exit age. So that was the national picture before. Now you start looking at it at the TA level. In 1996 there were just 5 or 8% of them, hardly any. Now in 2013, 64%, and it's projected to go to 90% of TAs. I've got there. So something's happened as it's passed through the air. If I can, let's just go back to that. So it was, what did I have? Oh, I can't put them all together in my head. Selwyn and Christchurch, even with their relative youth, they are the last in this area to reach the point of having fewer labour market entrants and exits, and that will happen between 2018 to 2023. The rest of you have already sort of joined that area. You can read it from here, but not very well. Sorry, so Timaru, Waimati, Waitaki, Mackenzie and Kaikoura had fewer people at labour market entry than exit age at the 2001 census already. Waimakariri on Huranui was back there. Something gone wrong there, sorry. So just to quickly tell you some of these incredibly low ratios. I've got here data for New Zealand's top 43 industries at 2013. School education is the largest single employer. 4 people at labour market entry age for every 10 in the retirement zone. So you imagine what it looks like.
But how many do we need when it comes to education?
I tell you that the answer, it's a good question. At the moment we can maintain it okay, but when that baby blip gets to high school, we need more high school teachers, and when it gets to university, we need more at university, but by then at least half of the baby boomers will have left the labour market.
Nice.
So it's about trying to work out how many are you, and you've got to prepare for them. If we see government saying, oh well, there's not a great demand for education in terms of domestic numbers at the moment, so we don't need to train anymore, but they are coming and they will arrive at the same time as the biggest cohorts will have left. So if you think about baby boomers in 15 years time, the oldest ones will be over 80. They're not going to, in 15 years you think back, that was 2000, they're not going to be teaching, very many of them. So then government administration, that's the second largest, 6 people at entry age for every 10 in the 55 plus. Hospitals and nursing homes, nationally it's 5, down here it's 4 for every 10. And marketing and business management services, 9 for every 10. So that's the top 4. And just on the list here you can see the yellow ones. So of the top 43, over half of them have fewer already at labour market entry than exit age. And you look at things like transport. We were having a discussion about that at lunchtime. Look at your grain, sheep and beef farmers and horticultural farmers. upside down age structures. You're talking 3 people in the entry ages for every 10. So the competition that's going to go on at the bottom of those age structures for the same people is going to be enormous.
Presumably there are industries where the numbers are the other way around.
Yes,
The industries
you're
that people
absolutely
want
right.
to go to. Have you
Yeah.
got that there?
Hospitality.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's no
Yeah.
some. You're absolutely right, and I always make the point. So here's one: specialised food retailing. There's 38 for every 10. Okay, and there's about
You're eating a lot, aren't you? You must be a
hospitality,
master chef.
hospitality, retail,
Yeah.
and some of the trades actually have relatively young age structures, but you can't take them out of there and put them in a hospital or in a classroom.
Yeah.
You know, it takes a bit of managing. That's what I'm trying to say.
What about engineers?
Engineers are, God, I'm just thinking, surveyors. I spoke to surveyors recently. They are slightly older than average. I've got a feeling engineers are just fractionally younger than average. I don't think you're on this list because I don't think yours is one of the biggest.
Yeah, but there's not too many in the room that are over 60 either. So.
No, and often a conference age structure gives you a bit of an idea.
Natalie, what about compared with specialised hospitality
Yep.
industries, other industries that perhaps aren't doing so well at the moment? If we took mining as an example,
And certain manufacturing and things like that, so
some
they're
of
going to
the-
decline.
textiles or something
Yep.
like that, yeah.
Mm.
So how would they compare? Because they will clearly require much of these people. Wouldn't they?
That's right. And so the work that we've done with Venture Southland, we projected the potential labour supply, like I'm showing you there how it's projected to decline, and then assuming 0.5% or 1% or 1.5% growth across the different industries, what would it mean? And it means massive demand for healthcare and for agriculture, and it means decline in manufacturing and some of the other services. So you're absolutely right. It's not across the board, but you can have these data for your region. You can actually have them for your TA, although you can't get quite the same breakdown because the numbers get too small. But certainly for your region, which is probably more useful. So the way to do it is to look at what is the, and I know you do that sort of work here, what's the potential for your future numbers of your labour force and how many are you going to need in the future and what's your supply-demand gap, but break it down by major industry groups.
So has that been coordinated at a government level?
No. No, and that's one of the things that surprises us, but it's kept us happy at NIDIA. Because we've done a lot of that.
For regions is if you've got economic growth that's trying to happen, but you can't attract enough workforce to make it happen, you've either got mechanisation to deal with that or it's a brake on your economic growth. And
Yes.
one of the examples I'm aware of locally is truck drivers. You know, they're paying up to 3 years in, a good truck driver around here now is $80,000 a year. And it's simply because there's not enough people coming in with the right licences. Fonterra grabs the pick of them, and all the other firms are really struggling to get staff. And you go, well, hey, you know, it's.
Is it a good idea to invest in the trucking industry then, as the government is clearly focused on currently?
I don't know. You know, the heavy transport's it's an issue. You know.
Transport would seem like something that's going to continue to be buoyant because you've always going to have to get goods from A to B, especially in our long country.
I was talking to a guy I know who owns a trucking firm in Timaru, and he's saying like most of his guys are 55 plus, and so they know within 10 years, because the guys have to do lifting and stuff like that as well. So he's saying like, you know, in South Canterbury, they're in trouble. They are not going to be able to get enough people replacing the old hands for retirement, and so it's like it may be a 10 to 5 ratio or whatever type thing, and it's just pushing the price up at the moment. So.
You have to line haul back on rail then, and shift those line haul drivers into.
Who knows? What they're
Although
gonna do.
as it becomes more, as there's more money in it, then more people obviously will go towards it. Supply and demand.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about truck driving in the mines in Australia, I mean, guys there were getting up to $150,000 Australian for driving a truck in and out of a mine. So you know, if that drops off and you got somebody, oh, you know, it's 100 now, I might come back to South Canterbury. That's the sort of dynamic you get going on.
But it doesn't happen quickly enough, and that's one of the things the bit that I'll get to in a moment. My student who's done a review of 40 OECD countries and how they are responding to these issues, you find that the market is not a very good deliverer of demographic, dynamics and so on. It
It's
can't
lagging,
respond
isn't
to it,
Yeah.
quickly enough, and so it will have problems unless you preempt it. And we often talk about the demographic dividend which occurred for us over the last sort of 30, 40 years as the boomers and their children, which were large cohorts, were all in the bulk of the working age population. That demographic dividend doesn't convert to an economic dividend unless it's invested in, unless you proactively work with it. So instead of that, what we did was mostly encourage the children of the baby boomers to go to Australia, where they have remained, many of them, and become part of the Australian workforce. So now we've got
That's why we've brought South Africans in.
well, exactly, and why we have to take it all really seriously. So look, that's the story. I've said already that older regions tend to have relatively low unemployment already, and certainly when we looked at down there for Venture Southland, what they're going to do, try and increase the participation rate at 55 and so on, already recognising that 55-year-old people in that area have significantly higher employment rates than the national average, and also if you get an increase in your 55 plus population working, you're going to lose carers, and that's another issue that you have to think about. So the caring, carers, it's a huge industry. So there we are. Later in the year I'll be bringing my star student Rachel McMillan down to talk about the work that she's done, so anticipating population decline, and is the first comprehensive study that I've seen that actually trawls across all the countries to see what they're doing and the context in which they're doing them. I think it's really important work, and we developed this idea out of this project. For a long time I've been, as I said, going around talking about, accept it's coming to a region near you, and everybody says, what do we do about it? I've always said there's a lot of things being done overseas, but it suddenly made sense to have somebody actually systematically look at them, because as she's found, sometimes things work and sometimes they don't. So just a couple of things from her to finish off this part. Essentially she's saying, towns, like businesses, they have to keep reinventing themselves, and that obviously some towns have grown up because of natural advantage or particular industry or something, and time moves on, industry moves on, technology's moved on, and so some towns fail to exist. But we had a colleague of mine, Peter Matanley, out from the Shrinking Regions group at the University of Sheffield earlier on this year, and he was showing us just slide after slide of areas in Japan where entire cities that look like this have been left, have been just abandoned because services couldn't be provided and so on. Now, I don't think it's going to get like that here, but for Japan, in many cases, they got overwhelmed with the rapidity of it, and they were the first real places, except like Detroit and a few places like that, which dealt with major shocks, to see abandoned homes and abandoned businesses and so on. But when you see entire malls that just don't have anybody in them, they're just being left, and they're relatively new. That's the sort of thing.
They're bulldozing whole streets, aren't they?
That's right.
I understand there's a lot of Eastern Germany's like that too.
Yes.
Migration west.
Yes, and a lot of Holland as well. And we're going to see more of it. I mean, New Zealand has been relatively protected because we've had the highest birth rate in the developed world. We've had relatively good net migration gains every year, and really we are the baby on the playing field in terms of population ageing. So coming along behind everyone else. But this is happening everywhere, and it's going to happen to us, but we just hope not as
The thing I find really, really interesting in the States is that they've got the same problem, and they've got this massive amount of Hispanic migration, which is legal or illegal, but with high birth rates, which is actually going to solve their problem for another century or so. And you listen to their political discourse, and it's just, it's incredible. They've got the one thing, this population that's actually going to keep them going really well as a country for a couple of centuries, and they've got this massive fight going on, and it's just because of one dominant population doesn't like what's happening, and they can see in the areas they're going to end up being less important than they are now, I guess. But it's really interesting.
These debates are going to play out, and they've already started now. But one of the things that I'm interested in is every year all the countries around the world are surveyed, the governments are surveyed in terms of their thoughts about their fertility rate, mortality rate, migration and so on. And nearly every developed country says our growth rate is too low, our fertility rate is too low, but our migration rate is too high. So, you know, they're in that stage where they're trying to sort of still put in baby bonuses and maternity leave and things to try and get the birth rate up. But it's not going to resolve the problem longer term, and that's the evidence that's come out. So I'm not going to go in detail to what Rachel's found, but essentially there's one group of policies which is basically to do nothing. It just says let the market decide, and the market will, and towns will close. There's the countering policies which say, and they're largely still based on an old economy type of competitiveness, and you know, still trying to get economic growth by bringing in different types of industry and so on. Although I might add, one of the things that she did find across all these countries was, and I mentioned it before with Queenstown, where you're very heavily dependent on one industry, you are heavily, really, really vulnerable. But where you've got widespread, diverse industries, you are much more protected, because obviously, you know, one goes up, the other might be down. It helps. But interconnection, trying to get all the sectors working together, trying to get councils working together and so on, very much is where Venture Southland Workforce Strategy is situated. Just the idea that you can proactively engage with this thing as it's coming at you and start to talk to you know, how you're going to get health delivery and how you're going to fund things in the future. I know that there's a local government conversation going on at the moment related to demography that is looking at future funding issues and so on. But you might be surprised that over there on the right is Japan and Germany, which is very much about accepting that population decline is inevitable and just trying to manage it now so that they sort of slow the rate of decline and ameliorate the worst of the implications and so on. So that's really all her big trawl through all this literature comes down to three positions, and just a couple of main findings, like that most regions that are losing population are still the old economy. The regions that are gaining population are the new economy with knowledge workers, talented knowledge workers who like nice places to live in. And you know, as warm and fuzzy as it sounds, increasingly quality of life and work-life balance and things are going to become critical, and nice places where people can come home to is going to keep people, whereas, you know, if you've got a really harsh old industrial type structure town, it's just not going to cut it when people have got other options.
So a place that has like really nice coffee shops, great pizza places, historic
Food.
Whitestone architecture, those sorts of places are going to be
Those sorts of
in huge demand. Yeah.
Mm.
No, I get it now.
Yeah, okay. So you got the idea. Yeah, quality of place. And just to finish off, just to say, well, you know, how are you guys doing? Well, actually, really quite well. You mentioned that before, Ross, so that some areas that have been projected to be smaller will decline, haven't. So I've got
What's
Ashburton
ERP
here.
mean? Sorry,
Okay, estimated resident population. So you know the difference. There's the census population and then the estimated resident population. And just in case anybody doesn't get it, the estimated resident population is the most robust population measure because it has had births and deaths and migration since the census added or subtracted to it. Whereas people often say to me, I don't want the estimated population, I want the census population. And of course it's okay. So Ashburton, 2006, 2008, it grew. The number is the how old they are. So it's the 43rd oldest of 67 TAs. Its 2013 ERP was 5.8% higher than the median projection, and very much to do with movements from Christchurch. Timaru, 9th oldest, so quite old, 1% higher than the 2013 median. Mackenzie, 5.6% higher, 38th oldest. Waimati, the 4th oldest, and I'll have something to say about that in a minute, 2.1% higher, and Waitaki 2.2% higher and 5th oldest. So it shows, and I just found the same thing down in Invercargill, went from net migration loss to minor net gain. Everywhere seems to have done better. And I'll tell you why I think it is. Stats New Zealand, well, this is the considered opinion of my team at Nydia where I was. Stats New Zealand apply a number for migration. They take the age profile of migrants and they apply an overall number, so maybe 4,000 a year applied against each of those age groups. But by holding the number constant, if a population is growing, you're getting a smaller net migration gain. No? What we do at Nydia is we take the age-specific migration rates, which I'll show you in a second, and we simply apply that to the current population by age and sex, and the number that then falls out, it might be 4,000 in the first year, but it might be 5,000 2 years later. And the age-specific model is what stats departments all across the world are starting to use. Stats New Zealand are still sticking with the number at the moment, and we're talking with them about that. Those numbers, it's not just on the proportion of the population that's 65 and over or any one indicator, it's the average of 8 indicators, so it's a fairly robust measure. Now, what I meant to say at the start was all of these slides, and you're probably getting to have had enough, all of these slides we have the data for each of your TAs, rather than put it all in here one after the other. We can provide it for you if it's of use to you. So you just, when you go through them, if you tell us what you, or tell me what you like, I will just sing it back to you. But you can see how for the overall Canterbury region, internal migration obviously became a bit of a problem because of the impact of Christchurch's 20-odd thousand movers. But net overseas went from -46 plus 22 and then down to 1,500, so it's wobbled around a fair bit. The overall estimated net migration being negative in that period, but clearly the 2014 data showed that the numbers in Christchurch had already surpassed the median projection. So I think as I said in my report to Sarah, I would be planning for rapid growth in Christchurch. Okay, so here's a little set of age-specific profiles of migration. You can see for Ashburton, so 1996-2001 is green, 2001-2006 is blue, and 2008-13 is red. And Ashburton clearly got lots of people of that age group and therefore got their kids as well. So that's one of the really important things if you get young people.
And that's a post-earthquake effect.
That's post-earthquake, yeah. But this also could be the fact that far fewer people aged 20 to 24 and 15 to 19 actually left. So there was
my parents live in Ashburton, and there's like the racecourse end of Ashburton and inland towards Methven, there's just a whole heap of subdivisions gone in there, and it's like quite obviously people moving into the town. So
yes.
Yeah.
And then you see it if you go through each of the others. Timaru, you had a slight reduction in the net loss at those ages, but sustained gains there, and also the kids.
200 people, that's not huge numbers.
Better than loss.
I think, yeah.
Okay.
And the 20 to 24 is all the young people going to tertiary education.
That's right, and they might come back. I mean, some of them will be in here when they come back. Mackenzie, same sort of pattern again. I think I remember from that study, definitely a big impact of family age people with kids. And Waimati, see that reduction of the net loss at young ages, which I think is really important. Waitaki, again the gains in the 2008-2013 year.
So that's quite interesting. Waitaki, you got 250 more kids staying in Waitaki now.
Net migration gain.
Yeah. So it was gone from
200 more than left.
Yeah.
Is it because it's more expensive to go to uni now?
But it's also, there would also be people who said coming in. So
It's just the overall estimated net migration, so it's internal and international.
Yeah.
More arriving than leaving, and the below the line is more leaving than arriving. So it's a big turnaround from 1996-2001, and that pattern you know, I wonder if it's things like, is urbanisation sort of reaching a point at which it's sort of peaking, slowing? I mean, after all, there's a certain number of us who actually like to live in rural towns and so on.
So the likes
It sort of makes sense to me, because I moved to Waitaki in about 96, and there was nobody my age when I was in that 20 to 24 bracket. It was like, but there are now. There are more and more that are staying.
Well, the overall age group, you can see there's a big bite, but it's if you look at it, it's sort of been packing out a little bit. But this is just the migration part of it. So a reduction in net loss is a positive, okay, rather than just thinking that it's still negative. It's negative. It's not. And again, I won't go into the detail here, but sitting behind this map, this is for just the Timaru district, but we've done maps for everywhere. So Timaru in blue here, it says where did the arrivals come from internally, mostly from your area and of course from Christchurch. Where did your leavers go to? Pretty much the same places. But sitting in behind those data, we have that we've got it by 5-year age group and sex, and we've got it for 4 census periods. So if you're interested in it, you know, it's quite easy. It's just a click of the mouse to bring the data up for your region or for your TA, and it also tells you what number were stayers over time, which is amazing. We always usually about 2/3 seem to stay of the population.
That would be really useful to inform that council debate that always happens about where are we going to get people from. Oh, you know, we can actually show them where people have come from. And,
exactly, and it's highly consistent over time. You know, most areas get them from the same areas, lose them to the same areas. But what is really starting to get interesting is if you look at this at 65 and over. Again, like I did the work for Tauranga, and you could see people living in Tauranga in 2013 who had lived somewhere else in 2008. Very clear evidence that they're coming in for lifestyle retirement reasons and so on. So you can do all that, and we're happy to give you that data. Just going forward, again, we can do this, provide this actually for the past period. We can show it to you by individual year, whereas these are in 5-year age groups and 5-year lumps. But it's saying that natural increase for the whole Canterbury region, you can see how it's projected to decline, and natural increase has been, you know, it usually covers net migration loss when it's occurring. In the future it won't.
Anomaly, isn't it?
Yeah, certainly the projection of the net migration gain for this next period with the rebuild is huge. But then you see that Stats New Zealand have kept it at about 15,200 a year going forward. So, you know, when you do projections, it can be quite sort of blunt. The way we go about it is this many migrants, whereas what we do is go back to those age structures. We take the, let's go back to there, we would take, say, add the age groups and then take the average, and we would say that has been your average over time, and we might take the red and say that you'd be a high projection, things are going good, and say a combination of blue and green, that would be the low projection. And when you apply those rates to the numbers, so if you say 4% of 15 to 19-year-olds left or something, then you're simply applying 4% going forward. It gives you a much more robust effect of migration.
I think the other thing
We're
of the
very happy
Canterbury
with
thing is that doesn't really take into account is once the Christchurch rebuild's finished, Christchurch will be the most competitive city in New Zealand in terms of its infrastructure and
yes.
surrounding dynamics. And prior to the earthquake, I think they were on a growth trend up to nearly 400,000.
That's right.
That's dropped off. That'll bounce back up again. I don't think there's anything in the fundamentals that's changed that. So.
No, and it will become a much more cosmopolitan city than it was in the past too, which might attract your good self to you. So you might, everybody, to keep this gentleman here, raise his salary or something.
Yeah, so he gets a pay rise most weeks. So.
Okay, look, it's just a couple of slides here. Again, this work will all be written up, and we're writing it up for each TA. So by the end of the year, hope it'll be a massive online document, but you'll be able to go in and pull your one off. And what we've done is to typologise, to try and put regions into different groups. So we're saying you get growth. There's 3 types of growth. Growth from both natural increase and net migration gain. At currently 39 of the 67 TAs across the country are growing for those 2 reasons. Then there's growth where natural increase more than offsets the net migration loss. So you still get growth, 14 of the TAs. Growth where net migration gain more than offsets natural decline, 3. So that's Thames Coromandel, for example, and Kapiti Coast, Horowhenua. I think they're the only 3 at the moment. Waitaki was there but has temporarily pulled out of the batch. And then the decline, the net migration gain is insufficient to offset the natural decline, none at the moment. Natural increase insufficient to offset net migration loss. So you've got natural increase but you've got net migration loss, and so you got the overall effect is decline. There are 11 TAs in the country at the moment declining from that, and decline from both net migration loss and natural decline. But overall you see how the bulk of the TAs go from that patch down to the bottom corner there. And I do have where you all fit, but I don't know whether you want to know that at the moment. But you're all actually pretty much all in growth from natural increase and net migration gain at the moment. Some only just, like Waitaki with small natural increase, but Christchurch of course is the anomaly which has natural increase but net migration loss. So we're working on that, and we'll explain all that in the documents. And there's another whole bit of work. I'm not even going to talk about that one except to say that those are my 8 indicators, and it says that, for example, we have a thing called the youth deficit. When less than 15% of your population is aged 15 to 24. There's no TA in the country that has more than 15% aged 15 to 24. In fact, across New Zealand, it's 14.1% of the whole population is aged 15 to 24. Now, it's quite a significant indicator because the CIA picked up on it about 1991, wrote a paper on it and said that when they look out, they can see this huge, at that time there were very few countries that had youth deficits as defined, but that as we went forward there was going to be this massive increase in the number with youth deficits, and they saw it as a good thing because it would reduce crime and things like that, reduce your crime rate, and we're seeing that, it's true. But what we've done there is to say, for every TA, are you over or under the national average, and by what proportion, and that's what those figures related to. And the last slide is just to remind you how differently the different ethnic groups are structured. And for Canterbury region, you have relatively few Māori across the whole region, only 8%, but half of them are under the age of 23. And when we look across the Māori and Pacific Island population nationally, and Pacific Islanders are younger again, median age is just 19, it's very, very young, they currently account for 27% of labour market entrants together. Okay, so in your region it's Māori and Pacific Islanders together here accounting for about 19% of your labour market entrants. They make up a large proportion of that generation, thank God you're here, and you really have to start looking at these kids, these young people as the future labour force of your region and getting them into certain types of training. I don't know how many of them are transport drivers, but it would seem a natural thing to want to get behind the wheel and so on. So encouraging these kids into training in the sort of jobs that you're going to need in the future. As the baby boomers retire, you can see what's going to happen. Young Māori, young Pacific Island and young Asian as well. Asian population accounts for 7% of your population here. You have only 0.8% Middle Eastern, Latin American, African, and that will be a growing demographic, and so you might want to encourage a few to your region as well, because to make that natural base. So that's it, and that's a jigsaw to remind me. It's like a jigsaw, right? We've got a lot of pieces. I've got some, you've got some, and at the moment we're just trying to get them up the right way and start to put them together. But we don't yet have the answers, so you probably will see me do this. But this is my C has changed from just communicate, collaborate and conserve.
I thought it was crying to your beard.
As Rachel says, choose your strategy, because from all of those, what's being done across the world, there is some sort of assistance out there. And I guess I just end where I started. I mean, you know, you are in a growth region and you're very fortunate. But you will also, as other regions decline, you're all in this, you know, game together. And so, you know, you're going to have to be, on the one hand, protecting your backs, and on the other hand, being part of that whole solution for New Zealand Inc. So,
but I think the thing with the Canterbury region, because we are growing and declining later,
yes,
and in world terms, we're already, New Zealand's declining later in world terms.
That's right.
This region should have a really good opportunity to, if it's got its eyes open, to say, hey, these are the things that matter, or that work, or seem to work, and get those strategies in place. Have time to get them in place.
You have.
Yeah.
You've got time, and the message is just don't be complacent that you're growing, you know, because everybody else is going to want your young people as well, and everybody else is going to want your skilled people, and they're going to want you. So.
And I was just thinking, like, I know with clients I've got on the Central North Island, they are starting to have to offer quite generous packages to get engineers. Yes, they are. Yeah. So you might be more concerned about some of your team, Michael, as opposed to yourself. So
I'll employ them up there, it's all right.
Yeah. So the thing is that you're going to get that I guess that salary and package competition that was going on pre-GFC come back into our marketplace a lot more, I think.
But
very
there's a lot
quickly.
of collaboration up there too. The councils started to work together. Rangatiki.
That is the story you hear.
They have
Yeah.
no option.
They are, and I often use myself as an example. I'm the only sort of academic demographer in the country, and you don't all need one all the time, but you know, you can share one, and that's the way you need to do it with high skills.
So with
we should
Kerry,
roll
we're
with that.
sending him to Honiara soon to share his skills there. So
Good place.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes, and young camera people also will be in great demand, and you should go back and fight for better conditions.
He works for himself.
Right. In that case, yeah, I relate well to it.
And charge more.
Yeah.
So that's the story really. I hope it has updated it for you. I know Paul Ross sits through it quite regularly, and but you know, when you
That just means I go to too many conferences.
when you know
doesn't
that, well, it's really difficult not to. I did 42 keynote presentations last year around the country. So, you know, I've just spoken to an enormous range of everything from fire brigades and St John's and PricewaterhouseCoopers and Ageing New Zealand and the infrastructure. You know, everybody's starting to get the idea and want to know about it. And I think very much about the awareness is really starting. I just wish it would tumble through some central government ears.
And that's the thing I sort of noticed since the February 2013 when you were here, is that people sort of became aware of it around that time in terms of local government, and you started seeing the information turning up in long-term plans and asset plans, and people just starting to, hey, this is something we need to think about in the future, but I'm not sure it's progressed. So now there's a conversation. Oh yes, this is going to happen. So that's a good conversation. That's been the last 2 years for you, I guess, getting that message out. But this work that Rachel's done, I think,
takes it that next step.
Around what are the management strategies and how then they get applied to transport networks and utility networks and public buildings and parks and things like that. That's going to be the application of what's happening. It's going to be the really.
That's right, and it's
the challenge.
That work is really important because it starts to, I mean, if you listen to this stuff, you really look at it and you actually take it on board and see it is happening, because it is happening everywhere else. It gives you, you know, authority to talk to your ratepayers and your businesses and so on about it. It's a really strong evidence base, and that's what we've really been engaged in, is to try and help you with that evidence base, and now it's to, you know, show you what some of the options are. But one of the things that definitely comes through from her work is that different courses for different horses, have I got that round the right way? You know, it's like your area is different, you've got a different combination of things, and you're going to have your own combination of arrangements, and they very much need to be worked out together from the bottom up, not just top down. I did work with, probably mentioned it at the last forum like this, with 153 New South Wales local government and shires associations in 2005, and we did a little 3-page projection for each council, said this is what your population is likely to look like going forward, and then they sent it out to everybody, to people with who looked after roads and footpaths and pipes and renewals and libraries and cemeteries, dare I say it, and said what's it going to mean for you. And so it was about building up the approach from the bottom up, because there aren't really any, just one-size-fits-all policies that will help. Yeah, the housing shortage is clearly only Auckland, or I don't know. Do you have a housing shortage here, or much of one?
You can't rent a house to save yourself.
No, not
rentals.
Yeah.
rentals.
Yeah, well, we
That's
noticed that
Auckland
even
is
in
buying.
Lawrenceville.
No, there's a real shortage, isn't there, for rentals?
I know for rentals.
There's
there
shortage
is,
in Waitaki rentals as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Has been for a long time.
Yeah.
but we're not getting the 15-20% a year growth in property values down here. It's more 5 to 7 to 8%.
Well, and there are still affordable houses.
Yeah.
You can buy a $250,000 house, which you can't get in Auckland.
Yes, well, you can some very affordable houses on the way up here from Invercargill, I noticed. And I imagine, you would think it would make sense for people from Auckland who's saying they can't afford a house to go to somewhere in these areas, but they don't. They won't, because they have all their family there, or their connections, their local deli, whatever it is that's holding them there. They don't want to go. In fact, I know in Tasmania they tried to give houses away. I think $7 or something like that was posted at a price of a house over in the west coast of Tasmania, and I think in the end somebody did buy it, but then they complained that they didn't have any facilities and services.
High $10 house.
Yeah.
Well, certainly, and the impact of the Auckland problem is felt down here, in that I've got a friend that's a valuer, and he said they had a huge downturn just after the loan to value ratios come in, and that was across the whole across the so it was felt in the provincial areas as well, and that was actually affecting the housing market and availability here. When the houses are still relatively affordable, so it actually had a negative impact in terms of the amount of property moving.
This it's such a huge area. Housing isn't my patch at all, but I can see, and I've modelled it in many areas, if you split the population up into primary accumulators, young people buying houses, and primary decumulators, say my age or older, start to maybe shed a house or something like that. In many areas, your decumulators overwhelm your accumulators out by about 20, 40 something. So it's got to bring house prices down, and that will be a good thing for all the young people that are currently just not entering the housing market as they did in the past, for obvious reasons.
There was an example, I think, in the Auckland Herald a while ago, or might have been even got on TV, about a young professional woman in Auckland who decided to move down to Wanganui.
Yes.
And bought a house for $150,000 or $200,000 and got into a professional practice and was on a real fast track to be a partner by age sort of 30 or something like that. And she was saying, well, Wanganui's not the bright lights of Auckland on a Friday night, obviously, but she's going to be a lot better off, she felt. So.
And for councils, something else I didn't think to mention when I was talking about industrial change, it's not just technological change, but there's a lot of choice as well. You'd have heard just last week that government plans to move to close down 3 correction centres and move them to Auckland. Now, I work with South Waikato Council, and Mayor Neil Sinclair will say to me every now and then when I see him, we've got 25 more people, we're bucking the boat. And what happens when they suddenly take away 100 jobs, So you have to be very vigilant when you hear some of these decisions that are made, which seem counterintuitive at this point in time, when you have, for example, the Prime Minister of Japan announcing a policy a few months ago of decentralisation. That decentralisation is something that we've got to do now to ensure that our regions don't decline too quickly. And they're doing that in Holland, they're doing it in Germany. That's decentralisation is something that Rachel's picked up on widespread across other countries. And I was invited to present to Treasury about 7 or 8 months ago, and when I mentioned the word, it did sort of rumble around a bit. They said we had policies of decentralisation in the 1980s, we don't do that anymore. So, it's like
Yeah,
saying you
30-year
can't.
shift, isn't it? So-
You can't let the market decide which of your towns are going to keep growing, and you do have to lobby for jobs of the sort that the town I grew up in used to have. The Inland Revenue Department and the Hauraki Catchment Board offices. It had a hospital, maternity home, lots of big industry, and they've all gone. But government jobs can be chosen. There can be a choice made about keeping them.
And that's the interesting argument. The National Infrastructure Unit Forum up in Wellington, there was certainly plenty of bright young analysts from government departments and people from private industry still going, hey, we want to have just one water company for the whole of New Zealand, one roading company, and everything in Wellington or Auckland. And one of the points I was making to some people I was having yarn to was, well, if you take all of your qualified professionals out of your small towns, who's on your school boards? Who's on your, you take that whole layer of it, then you might as well, you're just hastening the decline of those regions at a time when you need people there to provide the base for the productive infrastructure as well, like the agriculture. And there just seems to be this complete disconnect in New Zealand at the moment. Is like there's almost like, oh, everybody's going to be in Auckland by 2040.
Antithesis to resilience, isn't it, in reality?
Yeah.
So what sort of reaction do you get from people when you were...
Incomprehension.
Yeah.
Because the example I use is Wairau, okay, because there's an amalgamation proposal on the table at the moment for Hawke's Bay, which would see Wairau, Central Hawke's Bay, Hastings and Napier all joined together with the Regional Council, one council that would be based in, at the moment it's a SOP to Napier, the same they're based in Napier, but it'll be Napier and Hastings. So Wairau would lose all its design engineers and all of its, there would just be maybe a couple of inspectors up there. So you take another, I think the council employs maybe 100 people up there, so you take 50 of those jobs out of Wairau straight up. Town of, it's a bit like Waimea, it's like 4,000 type people, quite isolated. But they're the people that, on your volunteer fire brigades and all that, and there just seems to be absolutely no thought about how this actually plays out.
There's no coffee shop.
Yeah.
We're just saying that those are the people that support the coffee shops and...
all those
That's
sorts
right.
of things, yeah.
They train the local team.
Areas that people are going into in the labour force.
Yeah, that's right.
So I don't think we're having a very bright conversation about that nationally, about the need to maintain our regions for productive capacity, and so then you have to maintain base services. And I think the decentralisation thing that's happening in Germany and Japan will come. We'll have to get to it again in New Zealand. We're sort of almost, the opinion's almost 20 years behind the reality at the moment.
Well, it's just a general complacency, I think. Population ageing isn't really an issue for New Zealand, so until the penny drops, I do think the fact that local government New Zealand has very definitely picked up on it, and Solgum, there's some hope there because, they have a reasonably powerful voice. But it just takes a while to get traction. I know because I've been saying these things for 20 years. But they are starting to get listened to.
Yeah. Well, there's certainly some compelling graphs there that are...
Yeah, well, they blew me away, actually. But, because we only made them about 3 weeks ago, I haven't really had time to drill down and look at each particular one. But you look at them, you can watch your own TA, you can see the progression. And I've got them for other age groups as well. I just bought a selection.
Right, and you're still, Natalie, you're still doing consulting even though you're sort of out of the thick of the university scene?
Well, I'm 1 day a week with Massey now.
Okay.
I'm here, Massey is hosting the Marsden, which is paying for me to do all this, and 1 day a week with Waikato still on the cadence one, and the rest of the time I'm doing consultancies, and at least I would be if I wasn't writing 4 book chapters.
Yeah. So the thing is, if an individual authority wanted some assistance and just getting into the detail, you're available to do that.
Yes, I am, and the good thing is that it's largely free if it sort of fits in the. If it's something that I'm actually writing up, then as soon as I can do it, and I'm starting at the bottom actually, except for the one on Auckland, I'm starting at the bottom and working up because I've been working with Venture Southland and done such a lot of it, and I thought, well, I'll just work my way up. So as they become available, we'll put them out. And actually, really, I'd like you to think about them as a consultation document. So if I make some staggering claim that isn't true, please tell me, because that's been a wonderful thing about this project being funded by the Royal Society, that I've actually been able to go and physically visit a lot of these areas now, because the rest of the time, you know, you do your work at your keyboard and don't always have a visual of what the place is like.
So the sort of workforce planning that you're doing with Venture Southland, do you think Canterbury, like the places here represented, is useful for?
I do think so.
Yeah.
And I'm going back to Invercargill on Monday to present it to the board, the VS board, although they've had it for a few months. But I suspect once they publish it, and they do plan to put it out widely, I imagine you can take it off the web or approach them for it, and just it'll be the same sort of story, but your industries will be a wee bit different, and you know, there'll be different things that you might focus on out of it. But yes, I do that, and I'm finding it really, really interesting, because I did all this in Australia about 10 years ago, and I keep thinking it's time. And Southland is the first region to actually do it.
They're quite organised down there, aren't they?
Yeah.
So, yeah. I think they're also quite conscious of the fact that they're losing, they've got a real potential to lose population.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, they're looking at, potentially 12,000 fewer workers than they need when you get out about 15 years. So that's a lot, and that is that's allowing for about 1% growth a year. And it may or may not unfold that way, but that's how you work it out. That's how many you need, and in the different industries, aggregate them and then say what's your actual supply going to be and what's the gap and how do you fill it.
And so in terms of Southland region, I mean that's Gauls population.
Sorry?
That's Gauls population.
Yes, that's right.
If you look at the size of that,
Yes.
it's quite
Slightly, yes, that's right, just on that.
just on that.
Well,
So the number of workers needed to over 65, is that 10 to 10 or 1 to 1, is it?
how many are needed?
Yeah, how many are needed to maintain the population?
Well, it was workers of all ages.
Yeah.
Sorry,
So
are you
it's-
meaning the ratio of labour market entrants to exits, or?
Yeah.
So that ratio is 15 to 29
Yep.
to 55 plus when we're dealing with the employed labour force.
And it's 1 to 1 the ratio?
1 to 1's is parity.
Yeah.
Yeah, 1 entrant to 1 exit would be okay. But, the sort of things we're talking about and drawing on all the overseas workforce planning literature says things like, for goodness sake, make sure that you rotate your young people around the jobs so that somebody leaves, you don't completely lose the knowledge and so on. If somebody turns up and says, I don't have the skills you're advertising for, but I want to work, then take them on and get them the skills that they need. Just don't go, no, nothing for you, because there's still a lot of employers out there that think that there's just a bucket of young people still coming. A lot of people think that population growth is going to go forever, and they really don't realise that what's coming, and if they don't engage with it, they will struggle to get the workers in the future.
Yeah, it's been interesting in our industry. There's more and more councils taking on cadets. I know Waitaki's done that. It's still got people that come through, but there was just a realisation you just can't go out and pluck people off the tree anymore. And so across the North Island, there's quite a few now. I've got 1 or 2 cadets in the system, and so they're picking up the 17-year-olds out of high school and paying for their training and that sort of thing. So
And that would be a 15 to 20 year gap.
definitely longer.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're still a big gap sitting in there though.
Big gap.
Yeah.
And then that's the issue, that gap just keeps moving through the
And
age break.
and the sort of cadet scheme is a good thing, because you can also share them. So you can send them for 3 months to Waikato or something, and they pick up other skills. I think that's a really important part. Australia's done a lot of that in local government. But I was just thinking momentarily there, I spoke to Young Planners Association a couple of years ago, so you would have young planners that probably went to it, and they'd never had any demography. A few of them had sort of touched on it in geography during their training, but they didn't understand at all that population growth could actually come to an end. They never even engaged with it. Like, why would you think about that? You're just planning, you're designing, working out where people might go. Yeah. Well, you know, seriously, I would say every group I speak to, somebody comes up and asks me, am I sure? Or you know, it's a bit like that ad with the car that I keep seeing at the moment. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. I double check these data. I look at it. I check it against what's happening overseas. It is unfolding more or less as I've illustrated. Won't be exact because you can't be that accurate, but it's approximately right.
I think in our sector, one of the things that will be expected, I think some councils got away with it this time in your infrastructure strategies, you're going to have to address your demography and the impacts on your 30-year spend as a result of that, or as an issue, one of the major issues, I think.
Yeah, but it's a new ball game though now, because we're going to have to look at how to mix funding with infrastructure.
Yeah, no.
So it's not just me thinking about what our roading network's going to look like in 20
No.
years' time. It's actually, how's it going to look? What functions? What form is it going to take?
Is it going to have...
It's a different ball game now.
Yes,
It's actually
well, I think
completely rewriting the rules.
The comment you made at lunchtime, Natalie, you know, about looking at a photograph of one of the main streets in New York, and it was all horse and cart, and 15 years later, there wasn't a horse or cart, it was all cars.
That was
that was
a 15-year change. So
it was actually 13.
Yeah,
13
Grant.
years.
that's Tony Seaver. I think
Yeah.
have I sent you guys that link for that?
So, yes, so
I'll
that
put it
means-
up
Really
on the
look at
post
it.
as well. Yeah, it was
Really look
incredible.
at it.
and
It's
given
great.
the period that we're doing infrastructure management planning
That's
for,
right.
that's, you know, that sort of change can happen in that time frame.
Absolutely.
In saying that though, there's some things like the water still flows down a pipe as it has
For
hundreds of years ago.
3,000 or 4,000 years. Yeah.
Yes.
But certainly from
Transport.
transport is
Yeah, but you've got to realise that, like in Japan, you may not have that pipe in there anymore because nobody can use it. Nobody can afford that pipe.
And just to give you an example, when I was helping Rangatiki District Council with their asset plan, they have Hunterville and Taihape and a few other of the towns, quite small towns up there, full on-demand reticulation, and they were showing them as a full replacement. And I actually said to them, I think you need to go back to your communities, and given the decline, your population decline and that you've got going on here, and actually have a discussion about whether you go to restricted, constant flow schemes with household tanks, because my feeling was just from the initial stuff I did on it, it's not going to be affordable going forward for the replacements, and so they actually, in the end, they didn't make any decision on that, but they added it into their mix for consultation. So, you know, the thing is, even with water, you could end up with a change in service levels. So, hey, we're not going to replace with 100s, we're going to replace with 50 mil alkathene or
Yes, that's
HDPE. So quite a change in service level because of a declining population.
So one of the things that we struggle with is we talk about declining population, but we have a huge increase in the demand for water, so to speak, as in there's changing uses as much as anything, like with dairy and all the rest of it, and it really
And you have to provide firefighting.
Yeah.
You know, and that's your base demand level. So the people is just a little bit on top.
Yeah.
Versus what we actually deliver.
Mhm.
So, some aspects aren't so
Obviously there's going to be
influenced by
less people to pay for it, but there's still going to be the number of connections to pay for it.
Yeah.
So it's how affordable the water is going forward.
Yeah, I think with Hunterville, they were looking at over a 30-year period, their population basically halving.
Okay, you're right.
And you've got to say, because it's way up in the back of the Rangatiki, you know, there's not a lot of reasons why the town's still there. I mean, you could actually say the same thing for Taihape now. I mean, it was at a road junction. It was a Horton, several horse and cart distances away from the next town. But that road junction's a secondary or tertiary route now. It's just a town on the state highway. And again, the population with the work Natalie's done, the population's getting older. All the young people leave town. And if you go from, I think they're 1,500 or just over 1,000, they'll be down to 500 in 20 or 25 years. You go, well, at what point do you still provide a full reticulated on-demand system?
And for what area in that town too.
Yeah, exactly. So those are the sorts of things I think at a practical utility infrastructure point of view, you're going to end up grappling with is do you maintain that level of service or do you bring it down to a different level, and what the difference for the total cost for the town are. Real hard for towns because they don't want to give up what they've got.
They don't want to recognise publicly that they're in a decline.
Well, that's
Well, it doesn't
the
help the
biggest
houses,
problem.
does it? Does it? Yeah.
Sociologically, I mean,
No.
I just hate it.
Expectations.
And your politicians and a lot of your elected members and so on, promising population decline is not a good look, but it is about being honest and letting people in on the situation. It's just that another thing that Rachel found is be very careful if you start, there's terms like smart shrinkage and exit strategies. I'm sure you've heard of them. Be very careful because they obviously, bring about the thing that you're seeking to respond to if they're not done very, very carefully, and I probably don't even need to say it. But that she did find that wherever smart shrinkage had been put in, populations declined really fast. So you get out as soon as you can.
While you can still sell your house.
While you still can sell your house, that's right. So maybe that program that I heard about buying a Winnebago or something is actually probably a good idea. It's not stuck in the ground somewhere, is it?
Yeah,
That's genuinely neither.
No,
Nice.
we have to
But
charge
see,
people.
we had that situation on the Southland with nightcaps when, was it nightcaps where the forestry went out in Southland? And all the house prices collapsed for about 2 or 3 years, and then
probably was nightcaps.
and came back, and you had houses and
coal
nightcaps
mines
that had been maybe 60,000, and they went right back down to sort of 5,000 to 7,000 for a period of about 5 years because there was just no work there at all, and people abandoned houses, and then slowly other people said, oh yeah, $5,000, that's a batch, So then they came back and bought them at that.
I drove through Hura a couple of months ago, and that was really quite sad to see, just homes, beautiful homes, just people walked away, just left them.
That's on the highway.
Yeah.
Because they're talking about the water supply, they're having that discussion about even putting people on roof tanks.
Which, I mean,
There's quite a bit of that.
because of floods, all these
Yeah.
negative things. I mean, sooner or later, just have to come to terms with the fact that it can't be there.
Do what Detroit's doing, put bulldozers through the town.
Well, it's happening. Kids buy just burnish house and a lot of vacant land. It's really sad.
Yes, and again, various mayors have said to me, well, something that I didn't go on to talk about here today, but you're looking at a third of your population, nearly all of you, over the age of 65, going out about 15 years. Once you've got these people on fixed incomes, your rates used to be 2,000, they need to be 3,000 or whatever. How are you you can't squeeze it out of, get another 10 percentage points over the age of 65. It has a huge impact. So people say, mayors are saying people will walk away from my town, and so then, it's a worry. But I don't want to sort of finish it on a negative note because it is, it is the future, it is what it is going to be. But the thing is, you've got time to get a drop on it and make these decisions, but you just have to take your community with you and not promise massive growth.
Choosing your strategy is but doing nothing is also a strategy, even though it's a lack of a strategy, because that will lead to a certain outcome.
Yes, but a very unpopular one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for districts and regions that go, hey, we're actually going to be a bit, try and nut our way through this and strategise our way out of it, and what can we do? Be a bit smarter about a few things. They'll probably get a better outcome than people that just pretend it's not happening.
So are there many development board or tourism boards that you speak to?
I speak to just about every imaginable industry and group out there, but it's at the stage there's not many of them have got answers about what they're doing, and mostly it's been quite serendipitous. So the spillover from Auckland, for example, for Pokeno, there's not really anything that Pokeno did. I mean, I've been watching that population dwindle away to a couple of pigsties over in the paddocks, and now not only is there this huge population, but there's this huge ice cream factory or something dairy factory being built there. So where you plant a dairy factory, where you plant major industry like that is going to...
Prison and the landfill really close by too. Relatively close by.
But the Pokeno, there's two massive big retirement complexes going in, like the 5,000 people complexes or something like that, and then wall-to-wall subdivisions as well. And it's just, you drive along the main road, you look over towards it, and there's just earthworks everywhere that's going.
Sea of houses
Yeah,
now.
incredible.
probably about 300 houses in that area on the left that were not there maybe 2 years ago, less than that. Huge.
Yeah. I mean, same thing's happened out back of Rolleston. You know, they've had 2,000 lot subdivisions out there, but that's been earthquake spilled, so.
And retirement villages can be very positive. I always used to call them the Clayton's population answer, you know, when you're not having population growth, because if you're going to have this massive burgeoning of the older population, wherever they want to live and however they want to live, if you deliver to it, then it will generate local jobs, because they go and they, you know, older people, well, I have to qualify this because my mother is just such a whiz on the web that she books everything online, but lots of people don't. And so, you know, they want to travel, they go and buy it in the shops and so on. It keeps, you know, it's like, just like the baby boomers when they were young, they generated a lot of industry in the town. They can do it when they're older too. So I wouldn't at all be afraid of having more retirement villages in your area. I think it's likely to keep young people in the area working around those areas and so on.
We have much option, to be honest.
No, you don't. But embrace it rather than fear it.
Because we talk about lots more older people going forward and having fixed incomes. Is it not true though that they will also have a lot more wealth?
Yes, that's true. And a lot more health.
So they have more ability to pay for these services as well?
Yes, that's true, but not across the board. So, you know, it depends. You've got a relatively wealthy population in this area, this overall area. So, but it's, you know, you can't sort of develop up one size fits all policies that are going to work.
Danger too.
No, and I know.
Producing anything.
Selling off the farm and moving to town.
Yeah, but it's still not creative. It's not producing anything. And that's
Well,
you're getting an imbalance.
Look,
The bills have to pay though. Or some of them, but certainly the ones that are retiring now.
They're healthier, they're active, more active.
Yeah.
and they provide a huge impact on
They
the
need
economy
services.
in terms of delivering caring.
Yeah.
So remember that, guys.
Now, if
Are
we,
you saying that as the oldest bloke in the room, Michael? Or?
He says it quite a bit.
He's embraced
I wear 2 hats now.
so lots to think about, but I guess we've all got to think about them with the hat that we wear and figure out what they mean for us.
So we got any more questions, or are we going to let Natalie sit down and? All right.
It's been good. I've sat down around.
Thank you very much, Natalie, and thank you for everybody contributing as well. And I think that's given us a pretty good update on what's going on and heaps to think about. And hopefully you'll be able to continue keeping that message going out, and we'll start seeing some policy changes and some actual implementation. So can we just thank Natalie in the normal manner?